Michael, you are awfully kind to sit down for a minute and just reminisce for a minute about V, because that's where you and I met. It was, in fact, I related to a lot of folks the first day we met, and uh, it's something that changed my life. And I appreciate you taking a minute to just let the fans see you and say a word or two.
Well, I figured something was up when I got a free meal at your house out of it.
Yeah, I did pay for the meal. I didn't eat much of it, though.
Yeah, the way I remember meeting you was we're downtown. I was in my trailer, and I, for some reason, had the idea that the guy, I had not met you, that the guy who was going to play my sidekick was about 5'6" and was an acrobat. I really do remember that, and I thought it was a guy named Roy. And
Well, I was an acrobat of some sort.
I think Dan Blatt had told me, asked me about somebody, and we were talking about somebody, and I said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And I got some idea that it was going to be like, I think the movie Trapeze with Burt Lancaster and that little mute guy that caught him. I swear to God, I wasn't all there in those days. And you poked your head in, and we were up there. The honey wagons we were in, our dressing rooms were high, and I remember sitting there working out dialogue and stuff, and somebody said, "Hi, my name's Mickey. I'm going to be playing your sidekick." And I looked over and looked down, and I went, "God, he is short. He's real short."
You were up in the honey wagon. I was standing on the
Yeah,
ground.
but it doesn't make any sense. I remember looking down and thinking, "God, he's real short." and I went, "Yeah, hi." And you walked away, and I went, "This is a real strange guy." And then I went out and I went, I better go talk to him after I worked my dialogue out. And I went over and I knocked on your door, and you were playing your guitar. And I remember looking up at you and thinking, "Oh, he's not short. He was standing on the ground," because I was looking up. I was a little obsessed that day. If you remember, we had about 7 pages of dialogue. It was the introduction of the characters. And the only thing we talked about is we thought, when we go in, I said, we've got to do this whole thing with this new bullets. They're going to kill these damn alien guys and stuff. I'll just go through you, hand me back the bullets, and I'll pass it off, and we'll figure it out. And that's what we did. We just sort of walked in. I assumed you would play catch-up and stuff, so basically doing the scene. I tossed you the gun. I stuck out my hand. You handed me the mag. I popped something else. I threw it at somebody else. You handed me the gun. I gave it to him. And that was, I think, the first master shot.
We didn't even very first master.
Yeah, and we didn't even have a chance. I don't think we had a chance to rehearse it.
No,
we didn't really rehearse it. We basically, Dick Heffron said, he was a real good director, Dick. He said, "I want you in here. Let's just see if we can work it on. We'll see the rehearsal." And that's the way I remember it. Now, I was pretty obsessed with that day because I was like locked into the dialogue.
But you were the only actor and the first actor to start the production of V. You went to New Mexico long before we ever started shooting.
Yeah. Yeah, down in Albuquerque for the big balloon thing.
And it was the last scene of the show.
When they're all dropping the dust and all like that, we went down to the balloon festival.
That was the Albuquerque Balloon Festival. It's interesting because
December 3rd, I think, was the year before.
And we started right after the holidays, shoot the filming in L.A. And I did tell the folks I went to Wardrobe to get all my stuff for Chris. And I said, "Now, who's playing this Ham guy?" And they said, "We don't really know him. He's a Canadian actor, but he's all scarred up. He looks like he's been through a war, so it's the perfect casting for the two of us."
I'd been down for a while. What do you want to say? Okay.
No. I just thought it was interesting because I wasn't familiar with your work. I didn't know about visiting hours or scanners, and a lot of people know about that long before I did.
Wow.
And I must tell you, I was real glad that I met you and got to know you and became your friend before I saw visiting hours. So,
and Karen said my wife and I were about to celebrate 14 years of marriage. We've been together 16 years. She said the same thing. She didn't know what I did when we first started dating. On about our 8th date, I showed her my audition reel, and I went in the kitchen to make tea at my place, and I came back and she was asleep. She'd fallen asleep in my audition reel. That really impressed me.
It's funny.
Let me get back to
the
Ham thing. When I first, Dan Blatt and Bob Singer produced the show, they produced one of my favorite films, which is called Independence Day, with Cliff DeYoung, Diana Weiss. It was the first time I'd seen her. I think Michael O'Keefe, Kathleen Quinlan,
Straight
story.
I remember
Richard
that.
Farnsworth was
Dick
in it.
Farnsworth.
It's about great, and I got just called to go in and meet for this mini series, the second part of a mini series, and it was called V. I knew nothing about it, and the character they had written was named Hamilton Tyler, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was an ex-vet.
Perfect though for Ironside.
And that's what I said. And they said, "Are you interested in doing that?" I said, "Absolutely not." And they said, "I don't understand." I said, "Oh, and it was written by a man named Brian Taggart."
Right.
And Brian had called me up and said they're interested in meeting you and stuff. Like, will you come and meet? I went in and they said, "Are you interested?" I said, "Absolutely not." And they said, "Why?" I said, "My name's Ironside. The last thing I want to sit in is a wheelchair." And they said, "Really?" And they said, "Well, what would you like to do?" And I had some suggestions. And they said, "Brian speaks very well high of you. We're fans of yours." I said, "And I'm fans of yours. You guys did Independence Day." And they said, "Why don't you get to Brian and wander off and come up with something?" So Brian Taggart and I went off and created the character Ham Tyler.
Mm.
Got rid of the wheelchair. And I basically wanted to create a guy. And between the two of us, we worked out a guy that couldn't accept affection and couldn't give affection. That he had a past that had kind of chopped him up to the point, and who I wanted always to have a fairly large emotional life inside him, and which it made it easy to play. I don't know easy. It made it more consistent for me to play. That the character had that constant.
Absolutely. I remember one of the things.
I based him all on fear. I based him that he was afraid of situations, not in the sense of courage or anything like that, but afraid to get close to anybody. He'd lost his family, his kids.
Well, if you remember, we knocked out a wall between our dressing rooms.
Yeah.
And we basically had this one big dressing room.
They gave,
and
we didn't have big contracts, so I said, "Well, Mickey and I got to be in the same trip." They went, "Okay, we'll give you a 2-banger." And I went, that sounded kind of sexual to me, and I didn't want. But,
yeah, really.
So what we did is we basically cut the wall out between the two of us once they gave it to us.
What
It was one of
fun,
those
though,
fabric lock walls. We just sort of.
Exactly. What you're talking about is exactly what we did as Ham and Chris. In fact, we used to call ourselves Ham and Chris on Rye. But it's interesting because we did create a pre-life to these guys who had been through Nicaragua and El Salvador and had done
I don't know any other way to work, though. I mean, I don't know how to just sort of. Have you ever just hit your marks and got a paycheck? I don't know how to do that.
It's not fun.
There's a lot of good people. You know, we were sitting before this thing came on, memories. Jennifer Cook, who came into the series, I remember Jenny.
Star Child.
Star Child, yeah. She was a joy to meet.
And then Jeff Yeager did the series.
Jeff Yeager.
The hairdo. We
Right.
called him the hairdo.
Hairdo.
Yeah.
And I've worked for his brother. His brother's a big makeup special effects artist and stuff like that. He did all the special effects makeup for Starship Troopers a couple of years ago. I remember that, if you remember, Robert Englund he came on, and after the miniseries, we went to do the series. I said, "What'd you do over the summer?" Because I'd gone off and done some films and some of that, and he said, "I got this great job." He said, "I got paid a pretty good amount of money." He says, and nobody's ever going to know who I was. He says, they let me create my own weapon. I played this crazy guy in A Nightmare. He says, I made this glove with nails on it. There were razor blades in his hat, and I wear all this prosthetic makeup. He says, "I got a good payday." Kind of schlocky, he says, "But nobody will ever know who I was." And it was Freddy Krueger.
Isn't that funny or what?
And
I remember that.
his first reaction when he had finished was he had skated. I got
Absolutely.
away with one,
Yeah.
I stole one.
Well, we've all had that feeling at some time or another with projects we've done. Andrew Prine, we talked to earlier, and Andy, one of the things that he remembered most of all was dying at the hands of Michael Ironside with the Red Death, and he almost really died with that stuff.
That was amazing. This red stuff they had created was like a shaved fabric.
It was a nap of a carpet they had shaved.
And we had worked it out. Somebody that was supposed to pour it on his face, and he laid down. I poured it on him, and as they called cut, because I realized I was sitting there, I saw him ingest some of it during the shot, because I think the shot came down from above.
It did.
Down to him and stuff like that. And literally, as soon as they called cut, it was like Panic City. We had to roll him over and pound him on. We're actors, They say, "Can you do this?" "Yes, we can do this. Of course we can do this."
I have to say that the time we spent together doing the final battle and the few episodes of the series that I come back to do are some of the most memorable times of my life. We've been fortunate enough to work together again in Total Recall. We did the film in Canada, Black Eyes, and
that horrible unmentioned film in Montreal.
In Montreal, where we,
Will not mention that film.
Michael got us good motorcycles. I appreciate you doing that. But I can't even begin to thank you enough. I know this is not the most enjoyable thing for you to do, but you have so many fans, Michael, and not just from the other genre of films that you've done, but the V fans, all they wanted to talk to me about was you. People would come up to me and say, you were Michael's best man at his wedding. Well, I just remember, like you said, that's 14 years ago. So
Who told him that?
some people
Did you
came
tell
up
them?
and no, and they said, yeah, we know you were the best man at Michael's wedding. I said, I was. How did you know that?
I
So
don't do a lot of press. I try and avoid. I really
Yeah.
try and keep my work life and private life separate.
And that's why I thank you so much for taking a few minutes. to
V's
do this.
important. It gave me a lot of things. It gave me you. It gave me financial security when I needed it in the early '80s, and
A lot of people want it back. So who knows what'll happen. Do me one last favor.
what's that?
Just look in there and just if you were going to say something to the fans on a personal level, just what would you say to the fans?
Read more books.